Hey friends, welcome to Bokeh, a podcast exploring the ever-blurring lines between the personal and business lives of professional photographers. This is your host, Nathan Holritz, and I'm happy that you can join me today in connecting with photographers and entrepreneurs as we discuss photography, business, and, that sometimes messy thing that we call life. This podcast, it's brought to you by Photographers Edit, custom image editing for the wedding and portrait photographer. Just visit photographersedit.com. All right, Bokeh Podcast listeners, we are here for yet another episode, and I'm here actually with a brand new friend of mine, Mathews. Matt, thank you so much for hanging out with me for a bit today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, and we were chatting just before we started recording about the significance of in-person conversation. You're actually in Birmingham, Alabama, is that right?
I am.
And believe it or not, this is a couple of days in a row, or a couple of interviews in a row that I've had the opportunity to do with photographers from Birmingham, Alabama, which is really cool. But you're only about 2.5 hours or so from me. So maybe even if we don't get to do this interview in person, maybe at some point in time we can actually connect in person. That'd be cool.
Yeah, I'm always traveling, so I'm like worse than Felicia. I'm always going somewhere.
I like that. Well, actually, you know what? Speaking of travel, so I was on your Instagram account, and by the way, for those of you listening in, you're going to want to check out Matt's work. And on Instagram, it's Matt, Matt_Mathews, M-A-T, just one T, H-E-W-S. Check out Matt's beautiful work there. But Matt, you actually had a beautiful post, because I was really curious when I was looking at your work some time ago about horses. And I'd love to kind of hear from you what horses mean to you and what the backstory is there. But there's this post from back in, on March 7th. And if you don't mind, I'd love to read this for the listeners because it has to do with mindset. And I think it'd be a really great way to start off our conversation.
Absolutely.
You said, last Friday, I loaded up my trailer and I drove to another state for a very large barrel race. I was entered to run my horse for 2 days in front of hundreds of people. I told myself over and over that I was going to do so bad because I was so nervous. I didn't even give my horse the credit she deserves, and I already set us up for failure because my mind was in the wrong place. I spoke into the universe that I was going to do awful. Well, guess what happened? I did terrible. I came out of the arena that first day feeling defeated. I felt like I wasn't good enough. I wasn't worthy to be running with some of the best riders out there. I didn't know why I was still doing this, honestly. On Sunday, I had a chance to redeem myself. I knew that if I went into this run with the negative mindset I had previously done, then my outcome would be the same. I told myself, today will be better. I will learn from yesterday's mistakes. I will be focused. I will do better. I warmed up my horse. They opened the gate, and I heard, all right, Matt Mathews, the arena is yours. Running Treasures Dreammaker, my horse's registered name. Let's see what you got. Run when you're ready. I could feel my heart exploding inside me. I was so nervous, but I continued to focus. I continued to allow myself to do what I knew I could do. My horse could probably feel my heart as it started beating like a drum. She ran down that alley to that first barrel and turned it beautifully, around the second and the third just the same. I ran out of the arena with a much better run and over a second faster than the day before. I was so happy. What changed? I allowed myself to believe I could. I allowed myself to enjoy what I was doing and believe that I was just as good as the other running before me. I spoke positively about my run before and after. That was the important part. Remember, what you speak into the universe is what will happen. Speak positively. Believe in yourself. You can do it. Stop telling yourself you can't. First of all, you're a great writer. The storytelling there kind of takes me into the scene, but I love the focus here on having the right mindset. So will you just kind of start our conversation off and kind of expand on that idea of mindset and how that affects what you do as a photographer?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have always been that kind of person that I believe that whatever we put out into the universe is what happens, and whatever we think and whatever we say kind of comes to fruition and happens.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to realize that you are the only person that's standing in your way. And it took me a long time to realize that, if you keep saying negative things and you keep talking badly to yourself and you keep talking down to yourself and telling yourself that you can't do it, then you're not going to do it. And you're going to fail every single time. As you were reading that post, it kind of just reminded me that, it's just crazy to me that we can stop ourselves from doing something that we love, no matter if it is photography or it is running any other type of business or barrel racing. And, whatever you're doing, that there is so many factors that play into what you're doing, whatever you're doing that you love. And you can stop yourself from becoming amazing, or you can, encourage yourself and you can become whatever you want to be. And it took me a long time to really realize that. And I told myself, like, after that weekend, I was like, I will never talk down to myself again. I will never tell myself that I can't do it again, because, all of my friends are like, yes, you can do this. You got this. Like, you're fine. You're great. But I wasn't good enough in my head. And in my mind, I did not allow myself to be amazing. So, when you go into any situation telling yourself, oh, I'm not going to be able to do this right, or I'm not going to be good enough at this, well, then you already go in and you're already defeated. And so you have to really be positive about every single thing that you do. And just because you're positive doesn't mean that you're going to go in there and be the best. It doesn't mean that you're going to go and, be the top at whatever you're doing. But I sure as hell didn't go in there the second day and win the race. You know what I mean? I didn't walk away with a $5,000 check. But I went into the arena the second day and I did 100 times better than I did yesterday. And that was the goal. And I think really being able to just know that, being able to be in a good mindset and be positive will, always benefit you, and you're always going to do better than you did if you aren't negative about the situation.
100%. Yeah. And I love that. And by the way, you mentioned doing 100 times better than the day before in racing. Some may be listening and say, but it was a second. But in racing and various forms of racing, 1 second is a lot of time, right?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. 1 second can win the race. It's crazy.
But that mentality, I love that you made the distinction between, I think what we see a lot of in pop culture, at least on the Instagram quotes and this kind of thing, where people make it seem like if you have the right mentality, you put the right energy in the universe, things are just magically going to happen. And it's not the case. A lot of it takes the right mentality up front then to put yourself in the right mindset to do the work necessary to create those magical moments. But mindset drives it. And I have these tattoos on my arm. One is the Japanese word for belief, kakushin. And then the other one is sentaku, choice. And belief literally drives everything that we do. And if we don't have the right belief system in place, and of course, I'm in no way referring to anything religious here. It's just simply a mentality. What do I believe about the situation? What do I believe about myself and my abilities? That literally can drive our abilities as an individual, as a human being, as a business owner. And the cool thing is we have the ability to make the choice what to believe in that. And this is a wonderful example of that. So thanks for letting me share that with our listeners. And there's this beautiful post, the image, a portrait, if you will, of you with, I'm going to assume this is your horse on April 3rd, the black and white image. Mm-hmm. Tell me your horse's name one more time.
So that's Luna. I have 4.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So
just briefly, if you will, and I promise everybody listening, and we're going to get to the meat of this conversation here shortly, but I was so curious because this is not something that I get to see from, I don't think actually any of our guests thus far. Maybe actually take that back, maybe 1 or 2, but first of all, a passion for horses. And secondly, 4 horses, for goodness sake. I think that's incredible. What's the backstory? What's your passion for horses? Where does that come from?
So I live on a farm. I've got 11 acres and a lot of animals. And I grew up on horses. I was probably riding horses before I could walk. And so they've always just been my outlet. It is my way to escape any kind of, struggles that I'm having. It's my way to escape my business. It's a way to just be able to decompress and have fun and enjoy life. And they've always been just a huge part of who I am as a person and been a part of my life. I always tell people that if you really love horses, it has to be part of your DNA because there's so much damn work and they're so expensive that, I'd literally be rich if I didn't have horses. So it's definitely something that you have to love because it's a lot of work and it's backbreaking and it's, nobody wants to be shoveling horse shit at 6:00 at night every night. But,
it's true.
It's part of it, If you love it, then you got to do it. And I think that everybody needs something to get away from work and the things that just kind of tie us down all the time.
Yeah. Well, there's so many different directions we could go with just this part of the conversation too, but you point out the significance of having basically you alluded to it as an escape, but a lot of this is just, if we do the same thing over and over and over and over again every single day, it's going to become monotonous, right? Even if we love what we do, doing the same thing day in and day out, and at times it definitely can be stressful. it can put us in this mental state that doesn't enable us to be the best business owner, the best photographer. And so having something that takes us away from that shifts the mindset, that draws our focus in. I personally ride motorcycles. I've had the opportunity to begin riding at racetracks. And so I can, to a point anyway, understand the significance of what you're talking about with your horses and even racing, because I know that especially when I first started riding, it was almost meditative because I had to be present. I had to focus on what was right in front of me, or I could physically get hurt or worse. And so it caused me to be able to, I guess, set the worries and the stress and whatever else might be going on with work or my personal life aside and be present and have a mental break. And I think that's incredible, but I can only imagine, I don't get to actually, those motorcycles aren't living beings, right? The idea that you get to actually interact with your horses. I'm fascinated by horses. I've never had the opportunity to own them. I was that kid growing up that just like really got drawn into the Black Stallion series. And I still love that original movie, but I'm fascinated by horses. They're these massive, massive creatures, and the idea that you get to sit on top of them and feel that power and ride them is just a mind-blowing concept to me. But I think it's really, really cool that you have something, first of all, that's unique, but then enables you to be able to step away and, just do something different in life. We don't have to be behind our computers all the time.
Right. It's, I think it's really important. And like you said, there are 1,200-pound animals that can potentially kill you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like you have to, it's just insane because you have to have just such a connection with that animal, and that animal trusts you and you have to trust them. And there's literally nothing more exhilarating than hearing your name over a loudspeaker in a huge arena and running down an alleyway as fast as your horse can and turning 3 barrels and then running back out trying to beat a clock. It's, there's nothing that makes me feel like that. And it's nice to be able to have that escape from work because, like you said, it does get monotonous. And after photographing the same thing all the time, you can get burnt out. And I think that everybody needs something that just takes them away from work and things like that. And it's funny because people always make fun of me and they're like, you need your own reality show because my life is just so crazy. I go from having one of the largest boudoir studios in the South, like in downtown Birmingham, to living 45 minutes away on a farm with all these animals. And, at work, I'm like, totally look like the city slicker. And then I come home and I'm in boots and jeans and I ride horses all day. So it's totally a bipolar relationship.
But you know what? I think contrasts are a beautiful thing. When you have that person, my brother is the assistant concert master of the Chattanooga Symphony. And so extremely talented violin player. He's got his doctorate. He's extremely intelligent. And yet, so he's this kind of this one person on stage and teaching his students. And then he gets on a motorcycle because he rides motorcycles as well. So we go out and ride together. And he turns into this almost different human being. He has this outlet to kind of let go and be a little bit wild and a little bit crazy where he doesn't have that outlet on stage. So, this idea of contrast, doing things that almost don't seem in any way to go together at all, I think is a beautiful thing about human beings. And I think we should capitalize on the opportunity to be able to take advantage of those things. Try a wide variety of things. That, this simplistic mindset of I am, fill in the blank, and that these simple labels represent who we are, I think is really limiting. So I love that you do a variety of things in a very stark contrast to each other. I think it's a really cool thing. And that really is a good segue for me into my first question here about photography, your brand position. What is the unique selling point of your photography business that everyone might talk about when they hear your business's name?
I teach a lot about self-worth, and I teach not only photographers, but I teach entrepreneurs the art of self-worth and loving yourself and loving your body and being able to see yourself in a different light, and talking about brand and being a personal brand and things like that. A lot of people, I hear so many times from students, oh, I'm going to rebrand myself this year. And I'm like, okay, well, how the hell are you going to do that? Because a brand is not your website and it's not your logo.
Right.
Like a brand is who you are. You are your brand, And so like my clients always say, like, if you hear my name, they're like, oh my God, he's so funny. Like, he's hysterical. You're going to have so much fun. You're going to feel like you're best friends. And I feel like that's really important because everybody has a superpower is what I call it.
Sure.
And my superpower with my clients is humor. I'm able to break down that barrier with laughter, and I'm able to really connect with people and connect with my clients because I'm able to make them laugh, and I'm able to, take them out of whatever it is in life that they're struggling with and make them laugh, so being able to have that is really important. And I think that, like I said, everybody, and I teach all of my students that everybody has a superpower. So finding out what that is really important with your brand.
So humor is an interesting thing, and it's honestly, I wish I was better with humor. I wish I was a little bit more laid back and a little bit looser. And it's something that it's funny. I've literally looked for books, even recently, that would enable me to be I guess just a more humorous individual, to be a better conversationalist in that realm. And it's something that I want to get better at. And I think, I commend you for that ability, because that just doesn't come naturally for me. But I'm looking at your Instagram account again, and in the bio, it's interesting. There's this very simple line. And when it comes to the idea of a brand position, this idea that represents what we do, that is very easily communicated to a potential client or to the market or to the world for that matter, that the significance of simplicity and being very, very concise with communicating that brand position, I think it's really important. And the line that you've got in your bio is teaching humans the art of self-worth. I want to see that line on the homepage of your website even, because I think that sums up beautifully what you do. You not only have the opportunity as you teach photographers and entrepreneurs this concept, but you have the ability to teach this principle to those who are in front of your camera, right? You're enabling them to feel empowered. And by the way, Matt is a boudoir photographer. I should mention that up front, and we're going to get into boudoir photography today. But if you go to his Instagram, you'll see this. But you've got these subjects in front of your camera, and you are capturing them in the most beautiful way possible. And I'm sure the communication that goes on during that process is also helping them feel more confident in themselves. But what you do could literally be summed up with that one line. And I think that's a beautiful, beautiful brand position.
Thanks. I really struggled with that when I started my business. And, everybody's like, oh, I empower women. I'm like, really? That's boring as hell. Oh, and I am so sorry. I forgot. I cuss a lot, so I'm trying to keep it reeled in. But like I said, if it comes to my mind, it comes out my mouth.
Don't worry about that. Let's keep the conversation flowing.
So I think that being able to be able to have that connection with your clients is just really important. Nobody wants to come in, and I had a client the other day tell me, I would not have booked you if I were to think that you were going to be stuffy and super professional. I booked you because I watch you on Instagram and you crack me up and you make me laugh, and I felt connected with you. And I feel like so many people lack that. They lack that connection and that authenticity with their clients. And I think that's what makes people struggle a lot.
Huh. That's interesting. You know what? And I know we've kind of gone every which way today in conversation already, but I'm okay with that. When I hear, and I've talked about this quite a bit on the podcast, when I hear somebody say I'm an introvert, I think, again, the simplicity of that label is very, very limiting, and it's not nuanced. And I can speak from personal experience here, but I used to claim that I was an introvert, or at least had introverted tendencies. But when I actually took the time to step back and look at why I was feeling the way that I was when I went into groups of people or went to parties, or loud music going on in the background and this kind of thing, and better understood the psychology that was driving that, I was able to adjust my psychology, adjust the way that I thought, ultimately that belief system that we were talking about earlier. And that's enabled me to relax more in front of my clients and be more, quote, who I am. It's a phrase that we hear a lot these days, but there's some realness behind that, some significance behind that phrase. And so I like what you're talking about here, that a lot of photographers, I'll say at least some photographers anyway, probably haven't gotten to a place where they're okay with themselves. And there are reasons for that. There's psychology behind that, right? But at the end of the day, that gets in the way of them being able to most effectively connect with their clients. And that translates to the final images, that translates to the emotion even that client is able to feel comfortable exuding during the session. And so this is a really interesting talking point. And we've spent a lot of time on mentality already, and I like that. And you bring up a really interesting point there. I appreciate you sharing that. Talk to me about the significance of maybe the most important lesson that you have learned as a business owner. How many years have you been in business so far?
I started my business in 2012.
Okay.
So not super long.
7 years though is still a lot longer than many people have been able to keep in business. So props to you for that. But what would you say is the most significant lesson that you've learned so far? Like if you had just a few seconds literally to share the most impactful lesson that you've learned as a photographer with another photographer, what would that be?
To be authentic and be who you are. There's nothing like being who you are and allowing yourself to be real and authentic. And I think that really connects you with a lot of your clients, and people appreciate that.
And so this is, of course, largely tied to what you were talking about earlier, the significance of self-worth. I mean, if you feel, quote, worthy, then you're going to be much more comfortable in your skin, being yourself, and then that translates to the way that you engage with other people. But we also hear this word authenticity a lot, right? To the extent that it's become cliche, and you see it on Instagram and Facebook and so forth, and people are talking about being authentic. I'd love for you to make that more tangible. What does that mean? We'll just take it for you in your business, in your life. What does it mean to be authentic?
Again, saying what you think, don't worry about what other people think about you. And I think that my clients appreciate that. And I feel like it is part of my brand because it's who I am. And I've never been a person that really, really cares a whole lot about what other people think about me. So being authentic and being able to be real with your clients it's just super important. And like I said, my client said the other day, if you were to be super professional and no, I'm not saying that I'm not professional, but being super, kind of stuck up and snooty and, just not the way that I am, she probably wouldn't have booked me because It's not, it doesn't create a comfortable atmosphere. It doesn't create, an enjoyable experience. And so now I'm not saying if you're not a, in your face, like, hey girl kind of thing, then don't be that. Like, I'm not telling you to go do that just because that's how I am.
Sure.
But just be authentic and authentically who you are, because it's just so important. Because if people don't feel like they can connect with you, then they're not ever going to take that step in booking with you. You know what I mean?
It's true. And, this line, the balance, if you will, is going to look different for everybody. I realize this, but I'll go back to that example that I gave just a couple of minutes ago, this notion of, quote, simply being introverted, because a lot of photographers seem to claim that label. Where do you think the line is between learning how to step outside your comfort zone a little bit so that you can let loose, so that you carry a better energy into a session and engage with people more effectively, because it translates to the camera? I mean, you talked earlier about this idea of empowering women. The interesting thing, and there's some significance to that for sure, the interesting thing about I'll call it your brand position, is teaching humans the art of self-worth. I mean, this doesn't just carry over to female subjects, it also carries over to male subjects. Plenty of guys, myself included, have struggled with insecurity in one form or another. But where do you think, in order to more effectively engage with those clients, male or female, that you learn a little bit, you push yourself outside your comfort zone a little bit to let loose, which then, of course, naturally encourages your clients, your subjects, to let loose, and just translates to kind of an overall much more fun experience and better images?
That's a hard one.
Yeah.
You got me there. I think that we all kind of like to say, oh, we're introverted or we're extroverted or whatever the case may be. I will totally not lie and sit there and say that I don't as well. When I'm speaking in front of hundreds of people, like at the end of that, I want to go and hang out in my hotel room. But
Sure.
Like there comes a point where you have to realize that your growth stops if you put yourself in a shell and you don't reach out and you don't grow.
Yeah.
And so I think you have to really kind of push yourself over that line just a little bit and realize that people can't connect with you if you don't allow them to. And if we don't push ourselves out of that comfort zone, and that's what I kind of preach to my clients as well. There's a line of comfort and there's a line over that comfort. And when you step over that line is when you really start to live. And stepping outside of that comfort zone is the beginning of freedom and is the beginning of so much more than we ever thought we were capable of.
Yes.
And so even as an introvert, you have to, unless you want to be stagnant and stay where you are for the rest of your life, you have to be able to step over that line and just at least be able to give a little bit of yourself to somebody so that you can get out of that comfort zone and so that you can continue to grow.
That's awesome. I mean, you couldn't have really summed it up better. And
shit, that one was hard.
But that was really, really good, though. And speaking of Instagram and Facebook, Haley, who edits and produces our podcast, Haley, you're going to have to grab that soundbite and push it out there for everybody, because everybody needs to hear that and be encouraged by that. I think about when you say the moment that you step outside your comfort zone is the moment that you live. I've been skydiving a couple of times now, and I'm naturally...
I want to do that so bad.
Oh, Matt, you got to try it. You got to try it. It's incredible. But I'm naturally afraid of heights. And one of the reasons that I went and did this is because I wanted to kind of break out of that so-called comfort zone. And when I landed after that first jump, I had a physical high for 45 minutes. It was the most intense thing. And, this can translate to many different scenarios or contexts, but I would never have had the opportunity to feel that way and to understand the significance of stepping outside of my comfort zone had I not literally made that leap, right? Now, I'm not suggesting everybody listening in has to go skydiving, but there's an opportunity to experience life in a way, and context of our conversation, experience being a photographer in a way that you never have before, even if you're willing to just stick that toe outside of that little box that you live in. You just have to make the move. And I promise on the other side of that, as Matt just pointed out, is it's almost like a different life. You have the ability to live a life that you couldn't have before just because you were willing to take that step out. So, wow, this is really, really good stuff. I want to talk to you about time just briefly, because you mentioned earlier having 4 horses and, of course, the investment, particularly in time that it requires to take care of those horses, but you're also a business owner. How do is there something that you do in your work week, your workflow, that enables you to create more time and space for that type of thing, or to spend time with friends or with family? Is there a particular workflow tip or trick that you can share with our listeners?
So I'm going to be so real with you.
Yeah.
It is hiring an assistant. Before I hired my associate and before I had employees and when I did all this by myself, I had no time. I had 0 time to do anything that I wanted to do. I was not able to ride my horses like I wanted to do. I wasn't able to barrel race. I was literally at the studio 24/7, or I was on an airplane going to teach somewhere, and I had 0 time. And since I hired my associate, Brianna, my life has become so much easier. And I am able to rely on her to do so much of the things that I was having to do myself. And I think being able to keep track of task, and as kind of as go with the flow as I'm very much list oriented. Like I like to make lists. I like to check things off, and I like to remind myself of things that I have to do that way. And so hiring an assistant, having somebody that you trust that is able to take a burden off of you and make your life easier is honestly it is the number one thing that I recommend. Once you get to a point where you can afford to do that, then it's game changing.
But it's so true. And of course, the reality and the wonderful reality, especially in 2019, is that we're not limited to only hiring an assistant. I mean, I'm lucky enough to work with not just one person on my team, but a multitude of people. And that does make my life easier, especially when I learn to trust and to delegate, because now I can focus on, in some cases anyway, bigger picture items that enable me to continue to push my business or my businesses forward. And that's really, really important. If you're stuck in the busy work, the day-to-day busy work constantly, and you can't get up above that, then it's going to feel like a rat race. You're going to get burnt out really easily. And then just, business no longer seems fun. So I understand what you're talking about and the significance of having someone there to be able to delegate work to that helps you manage it all. It's so, so important. But what I was getting to earlier is that we're in this day and age where we have the ability, whether it's taking advantage of software to automate some of that busy work, the communication or otherwise, taking advantage of companies that will do album design work for you or accounting work for you, or of course with Photographers Edit, editing work for you. There are opportunities to be able to delegate work out so that you don't have to do it all yourself. And to Matt's earlier point about the significance of being yourself, doing this, delegating your work as much as you possibly can, that work that doesn't actually require your involvement, will enable you to better focus on just being you. And it frees you up to be able to not only build your business, but then to do the things that you really, really love. So I like that you bring up the significance of delegation there, and having an assistant or even just delegating certain tasks. That will make a massive difference in our listeners' businesses for sure. What's one of the most impactful business or self-help books that you've read or listened to, or maybe you just do podcasts? Can you share some of that with us?
So it's really funny. I'm actually writing a book right now.
No way.
It's we're actually editing the second manuscript now. It is about my life basically, and how I kind of came from nothing and became successful. And It is a inspirational memoir is what they're calling it. And so what's really funny to me is because I don't read. Like, I sound so stupid saying that, but I'm just not a big reader. Like, I'll start a book and then I can't really finish it. Although I will say a book that really, really inspired me was, I don't know if you, I mean, surely you know who Jewel is, the singer Jewel.
Yeah.
I read her memoir. It was Jewel songs are just part of the story. And it basically talks about the same thing, how she started with nothing and she had, a really terrible life and she overcame a lot of her obstacles. And that's kind of, it really inspired me with not only my book writing and my life, but with the business as well, because, she's a singer and a songwriter. So it's essentially the same thing as a photographer. You're still doing your own business and you're still working and you're still having to put that inspiration in somewhere. And so it was a really, really great book, regardless if you listen to her music or not. But.
Well, and we'll link to that book in the show notes. For those of you listening in, Bokeh, Bokeh podcast.com, you can find the show notes for today's episode. And Haley's begun adding timestamps actually to the content in the episode. So if you have limited time, you don't have an hour or whatever it is to listen to an whole episode, and you want to get to particular topics, you can look for that information as well as links to the resources that we talk about today. But I'm curious, Matt. So, I listen to, I'm a fan of Gary Vaynerchuk for both his work ethic and then also his marketing, his approach to marketing. And one of the things he talks about is the fact that he doesn't read. And yet you have somebody who is very intelligent and is obviously very successful. I'm curious, how do you go about learning? Is it strictly from experience? Do you have mentors? What does that look like?
I honestly think it is from experience. If I sit down and I read a book, I may be able to read for a little bit and then I get really tired and I fall asleep in the middle of the book. Regardless, it's always been a struggle for me to read. Not that I'm just dumb and I can't read, because I can. It's just, it doesn't engage my brain.
Sure.
So being able to learn from experiences or something that's always kind of really helped me. When I started, my business was not easy. It didn't come easy. It wasn't, when I started, there weren't a whole lot of educators. There weren't really any mentors. So I kind of just honestly went with the flow and, just kind of trial and error. And so that has been my biggest thing. As far as mentors, I don't really have a whole lot of people that I talk to about things that are, photography related or anything like that, just because I try to really stay in my own lane. I try to honestly keep blinders on and not look at anybody else and just focus on myself, because I know that, when you do that, when you look at other people, it kind of, you kind of start comparing yourself and things like that. Yeah. So I try to really stay in my own lane. I will say though, somebody that really inspires me that is a photographer is actually Annie Leibovitz. I love her and I love her style. And so I like what she stands for and I like, what she's done in her career. So
yeah, particularly her raw journalistic work is really quite interesting, where she's more specifically photographed her own personal life. Some of that work is just stunning stuff. It's very raw, kind of very telling. And I definitely am a fan of Annie as well. But I think about what you said a second ago, that if you start to read, you fall asleep. This actually reminds me a lot of my girlfriend, who is also very similarly a doer, somebody who wants to get things done, that kind of goes hard through the day. And by the end of the day, like the idea of laying down or sitting down and reading a book is just going to lead to sleep, or even watching a movie is going to lead to sleep, because she's the one that's doing things. While people are maybe sitting around talking or philosophizing or being fancy or whatever, she's actually doing things, and she's been very, very successful in what she does. And that reminds me of you, or vice versa. You're one who gets out and does, and you've got a successful business, and you're learning through experience. And there's a lot to be said about that. So I have a lot of respect of that kind of mentality, that approach to life. So props to you for that. Talk to us just briefly. This is kind of a fun question, but what is the most unusual item in your camera bag that enables you to be a better photographer? And this doesn't have to be a camera or lens. It could be literally anything. What comes to mind?
Honestly, there's nothing special. There's a Canon 5D Mark III and a 50 millimeter lens. That's literally all I use. That's it. There's no special weapon in there.
Well, that's great. I love simplicity. I'm a huge fan of that. So you said the 50 millimeter lens?
The 50 millimeter 1.2.
1.2. Okay. So the natural question, or one of them innate to a fixed lens of that particular focal length, is what happens when you want to get a wider shot? I mean, obviously you're going to move around, but are you not limited in certain spaces where that 50 just doesn't make sense? Or does that limitation enable you to just be more creative?
You just back it on up like a U-Haul truck. I mean, you just got to you back it on up until you can't back it no more, and then you good. I mean, I'm always shooting in my studio or I'm outside or whatever, and so I usually don't have any issues with that.
Okay.
And I guess if I do, you just got to get creative and you just got to make it work. I'm just that person that if you don't have any options, you make that shit work no matter what. So you keep trying until it works. Luckily, I haven't ran into an issue where I haven't used it. I do love the 35 1.4 as well. I do have that lens, but I honestly never shoot with it. The 50 has just always kind of been my baby. Honestly, it never even comes off of my camera. And one day I may get in it and I may be like, oh shit, I wish I had another lens. But for now it works for me, and that's just my combo. It's what I've always loved, and it works.
Well, and so it works, but I'm curious at least what's driving that. Were you never curious to try other lenses, or did you just like the simplicity of that workflow where, like you said, you don't have to take it off your camera, you just pick it up and you start shooting? What drove that initially?
Both. I love the simplicity. I don't want to have to sit there and change lenses 100 times.
Yeah.
I actually started my career as a wedding photographer, so I've shot with 1 million lenses.
Okay.
Like I said, I still have a 35 millimeter. I still have a 70 to 200. I still have 100 macro. Like, I've got all of those, but I literally don't use them. They sit in a bag in my guest bedroom, and everyone's like, "Oh, you should sell them." I'm like, maybe what if I need them one day?
Sure.
But I literally don't use them. I love the 50 because of the creaminess that it gives me. I love, I shoot all of my clients on like 1.8 or 2 for my aperture, and that's just been part of my style ever since I started, and I don't see that changing anytime soon.
I love it. I love the simplicity of that, and I love how it naturally creates parameters that force you to make other adjustments, right, in order to accommodate that focal length.
Absolutely.
And again, for those of you listening in, you're gonna want to check out Matt's work. If you go to Instagram, it's just MATT Matt_Mathews MAT, just one T HEWS. And by the way, your website, I'll go ahead and mention for everyone as well. It's Matt Mathews, again with one T, photography.com. And by the way, I love that portrait of you on your homepage. And again, the kind of personalization innate to letting that be front and center when somebody comes to visit your site. That's great.
Thanks, I appreciate it. That's an old photo. That's a couple pounds ago.
Well, let's talk about your boudoir photography. And first of all, it's interesting to watch, even in the last, I don't know, I'd have to say in the last year, to see the acceptance of boudoir photography in the mainstream and particularly the photography industry. It's becoming more and more accepted. But naturally, this also means that there's going to continue to be more growth in the number of boudoir photographers, kind of like we've seen with wedding photography. So a part of creating a unique experience so you can actually set yourself apart is, at least according to many photographers, creating a distinct photography style. Innate to that is technique, of course, the actual composition, the way the image is captured. And we're going to actually talk a little bit more about that here in just a second. But then you also have editing style. So I'm curious, just to get the conversation started, how significant a role do you feel like photographic style has played in the development and the growth of your boudoir business?
I think it's definitely played a large role. I feel like as artists, we always continue to evolve and we always grow. Our work always changes. I'm sure in a year from now, my work will look totally different than it does now. But I feel like that's really important, because if you think about it, boudoir has really always been around. Like it's never gone anywhere. It's just only gotten popular and only gotten sexier.
Right.
I mean, think about in the 1980s, like boudoir Walmart portraits were with your jacket hanging off your shoulder and your hair up to Jesus. Like that was boudoir, but in the 80s, you know what I mean?
Sure.
So it's only evolved and gotten sexier. And so I think we have to just really continue to be able to evolve with it. And really, I think the style has, it's as long as we continue to evolve with the style is when we continue to grow, and it's only going to get sexier. It's only going to get, well, I don't know, because Facebook and Instagram be trying to play folks. They be trying to delete it.
That's true.
But But, like it's really important to be able to evolve and to grow with that style and really hone into that, because it is such a big part of your business. And people can look at my work and be like, I know that was Matt Mathews because X, Y, and Z.
Sure. You talk about the significance of evolving or evolution. And I mean, we know that styles, I've been in the industry close to 20 years. So I've seen, and as a wedding photographer, I'm certainly guilty of kind of playing into whatever trends are going on in the moment. And, and then of course, looking back at that and being like, what in the world was I thinking? But styles, trends, they do kind of come and go and they change. And so it is important to be open-minded and keep in mind that these things do come and go, and that, in the long run, not only are you going to look at that work, but your clients are hopefully going to be still looking at that work. And you want to make sure that it's not something that's going to look totally wild and crazy, even just in 2 or 3 years. Some of the stuff that I've seen over time, and even more recently, that photographers are doing to their images, it's so over the top. There's no consideration for how this might look in the client's home, in an album or on a print on a wall in 3 years or 5 years or 10 years. And I think that's a little bit problematic. But you have a very clean, very classic style. That's me summing it up. How would you sum up the photographic style with your boudoir business?
I think my style is it is clean. I think it's very timeless. That's the whole goal of my work. Is I want you to be able to look at my work in 5 years and still love your images. You're coming and you're spending a bunch of money on a beautiful album, and I want you to be able to sit down in 30 years with your husband and a glass of wine and really look at your images and still love them and still feel sexy and remember that time in your life. And I think that you're right. A lot of photographers now add a bunch of presets and add a bunch of actions and do a bunch of bullshit that just isn't necessary. And,
right.
I'm like, don't nobody need all that. You need to keep it clean, keep it simple. And that's how I like to stay with my work. I mean, my work is very much raw. It is very much authentic, and it's simple and it's timeless. And that's the way I like to describe it, because I want you to be able to love your images just as much as you do now in 10 years.
Let's talk, though, about how you actually got to this point, though. I mean, first of all, could you, if you were to think back about 7 years ago when you were starting as a wedding photographer, how would you sum up your work then? Have you always had this effort at being clean, being classic, or did you try a variety of things?
No, I've always been pretty clean. I started out shooting film. Okay. And so honestly, when I shot film, I shot the film, I had it developed, and that is what it looked like. You kind of got what you got. And I always loved the look of film. I always loved the colors and the skin tones and things like that. And I loved that I didn't have to worry about doing a whole bunch of editing to it. And so even as a wedding photographer, when I would get my images, when I would photograph digitally, I would, just the whole goal is to get it perfect in camera. Get everything as good as you can in camera so that you don't have to do a whole lot of editing, because back to time management. Don't nobody got time to be sitting at a damn computer for 4 hours editing, one session. Like, it's just not manageable, especially if you don't have, team and help doing so. So I think that being able to keep it simple and clean is really important, unless you just, want to waste a lot of time.
Oh, again, you summed up the significance of time there wonderfully when in the context of editing. A lot of photographers do make a lot of work for themselves by developing these complicated styles that, the reality is, in probably most cases, and I would even venture 95% of cases, the client, they may think that image looks cool, but they don't understand the amount of time that you put into that, the hours and hours that you spent probably trying to come up with that style. And then, of course, ultimately, the amount of time it takes to translate that to the image. Those nuances. Yeah,
then they don't want to pay for it, and you wasted all that damn time.
Well, that's true. But then there's all of that time spent coming up with that and then implementing that style that is particularly complicated. It really seems to play more to the photographer's interest and their peers' interest maybe than it does to the client's interest and actual desires. And yes. I think that's something that needs to be talked about maybe a little bit more. But regardless, having a style, there's obviously nothing wrong with it. And you don't want your work just looking the same as everyone else around you. So let's talk about how to go about defining or even refining your boudoir style. Will you share with our listeners some of the big ideas that have enabled you or that have driven you to kind of come to the style that you have developed at this point, and that they can maybe apply this to the development of their boudoir style?
Yeah, like I said, I like to learn by seeing things. I'm not good at just reading. I like to see it. And so a lot of the times, like when I was developing my style now, the style that I have now is very kind of a little dark and moody, a little even like it's kind of a mixture. But the way that I developed that was I love to look at editorial work, and I love to look at things that I wasn't going to compare myself to, but things that I enjoyed visually. And so being able to see shadows and highlights and where they fall on the body and how did they create that image, where was their light placed, did they use an artificial light, that kind of thing. And so that really kind of helped me hone into the style that I have. And I think once I kind of found it, I remember there being a day that I shot a session and I was like, oh, this is it. Like this is what I wanted.
Yeah.
Like this is what I've been wanting to do the entire time. And then once I learned like the trick or the whatever tip it was that I did to create that image and to create those highlights and those shadows, is when I really learned, okay, well, this is what I have to do to continue to, grow that style and that look that I was going for. And so I think that, really being able to see what you like visually is important. And then not necessarily trying to recreate or mimic that, but, add it into your own style and put your own kind of twist on it.
Yeah. So there are really two components that you've just talked us through, innate to going about either defining or refining your style. One is just learning, or maybe awareness even is a good word here, but learning what it is that you like. And you talked about editorial work. Are there certain magazines or otherwise that you like to look at where you got these ideas about not only the composition that you enjoyed, but the use of light that you enjoyed as well? Was it movies as well? Like what were these sources of inspiration?
Yeah, I really like cinematic work. I like, and the thing that, that I really want to get across here is just because you see it doesn't mean that you have to, like I said, you don't have to mimic it. I love photographers' work that use strobes and really can create a beautiful, dramatic portrait with, just like Annie Leibovitz does with, an artificial light and a strobe. But I don't personally use that myself. I use natural light. So, being able to be inspired and see these things that you like and that you visually are attracted to just kind of helps you grow, but you don't have to mimic it and do it the exact same way. And so I'm really inspired by cinematic work, and I'm really inspired. I really like, although I don't shoot editorial work, I like Vogue magazine. I love the weird poses, and I love the dramatic lighting and, things like that. I've actually kind of gotten a little more into Sue Bryce. I love her dramatic kind of lighting that she's been doing lately. I think that's been really pretty and really cool. And so I like to, like I said, I try to not look at a lot of other photographers, just because then you kind of start to compare yourself. And I think that comparing is not a good thing at all.
Well, I used the word awareness earlier, and I think there's a difference between awareness and just simply copying, right? Or feeling a pressure to copy because that's the quote thing to do. I think awareness is good, but then as you said earlier in our conversation, focusing on what you're good at or staying in your lane, that really enables you to double down on what you're actually not only good at, but what you're currently doing and be present in that. And I think that's really important. But developing, you've mentioned, I think you alluded to light in this process of developing awareness of what you like. How did you go about learning to see that? Or what did that look like? What did that process look like? Because I think back to, and I've mentioned this before in the podcast, but watching movies was a process for me. You referenced cinema as well, of learning to see how a scene was lit. Particularly rim light or backlight was something that I would notice. But I started to see that. So I'd watch movies and notice that, and I continued to notice that. But then it enabled me, because I was seeing that and seeing how it was being used, to then apply that or implement that use of light in my own work as well. But what did that process look like for you?
Well, it's funny because as a wedding photographer, I didn't have any I never used strobes or anything like that. I was always natural light. And so it was always just pretty much naturally even lit portraits outside. And so I really didn't get to play with light and really learn about light until I became a boudoir photographer. When I started my business in a 300 square foot room in my house.
Wow.
And it had windows all around. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. The only thing that I knew to do was have an even light onto the subject. So all of my images were very evenly lit.
Okay.
They were very much bright and airy because I didn't know how to use light in any other way. And so I then learned that the way that you're able to learn with light and shadows is to be able to use it properly. And the way that you have to do that is by blocking it out. And so I would start putting like styrofoam boards or cardboard boxes or blacklight curtains on other windows to block out light from coming in. And I would use one light source or one window. And so using that and backlighting and things like that really changed the game for me when it came to using those highlights and those shadows. And it's easy to see it fall onto the body. And as soon as you can see it on the body, then you can obviously photograph it the same way.
Right.
But it really took playing with the light and owning the light and making the light work for me to really understand it and learn about it. And again, it wasn't reading a book. It wasn't, watching videos. It was honestly just doing it and figuring it out until I liked it, until it looks like, the work that I wanted to create.
That's cool. But there's a very clear process here that is, you went about learning what you liked and various sources innate to that process. But then you began to learn how to apply what you've learned. So there's the learning what you like, then there's the application of what you've learned, and it starts with playing with light. And of course, that's the wonders of digital. I also started on film, so I know what it's like to shoot film, but then also how wonderful it is to be able to have that immediate feedback on your screen, and you can begin to play with light, whether it's natural light or otherwise, and learn to see how it works. And I love the simple notion, the way that you described it, of blocking light out in order to encourage or create directional light. That is certainly a significant principle. But learning how to see the light first, or developing an awareness of how light works, but then applying that through practice is really, really important. And of course, we can do that with little to no cost to us. So that's really, really great. But then also there's composition. And I'm looking at your Instagram feed again, and there's a variety of composition here. It seems like these days there are certain compositions, even not just editing styles, but composition in particular, with the kind of wide angle shots with subjects that are small in the image, and the grandiose scenery, and not to minimize the significance of that, because there's some really, really beautiful work out there. But there's a tendency in many cases to shoot a lot of the same stuff. I'm looking at your Instagram feed here, and there's certainly plenty of close-up. But then there are some that are pulled back a little bit further. You get full length, and then some that are, maybe just a quarter length. And then there's another one right here as I'm scrolling through where it's just a close up on the body and the subject's face is not in it. There's a decent amount of variety here. How did you go about deciding what composition worked for you? And maybe even in the shoot, how do you go about deciding how to compose a frame?
Well, it started by not wanting everything to look the same.
Okay.
I wanted everything to be different. And here's the thing, if you're shooting boudoir, there's only so many damn ways a woman can lay on a bed. You know what I mean? So you're essentially shooting the same thing. So in order for me to get different compositions and different pieces of work that I could share that didn't look the same and wasn't the exact same thing that I'm posting every day, because people are going to get bored of your ass. They're going to be like, look, it's the same thing every day. So I really, really tried and pushed myself to learn how to photograph one pose and get 5 different images out of it.
Okay.
So go from somebody laying on their back. Okay, well, they're laying on their back in that one pose, but get a detail shot of their lips, or a detail shot of their hands on their chest, or a detail shot of their collarbones. So just different scenarios where, number one, you're saving time because they're just in that one pose, but
right.
You're able to get 5 different images and 5 different composited images, from that one pose. And so for me, again, it was really just, how can I, especially starting in a 300 square foot room, how can I utilize this space and get a lot of beautiful images that aren't the same, that, convey emotion and are beautiful and sexy, but not the exact same thing every single day. So I had to really learn and push myself out of the box and think of different parts of the body. And I had to really think of, okay, do I just want another picture of somebody laying on a bed, or what else do I want to add to that? What if this is real and documentary? What is somebody going to do if they're just laying on the bed? Like, they're not dead. So like, they're doing something. So bring that to life. And that was really important to me when I was trying to learn to photograph people and have it be more documentary than just a bitch laying on a bed, because nobody cares about that.
Well, yeah. I mean, you're talking about movement. I like the fact that you point out that this is not a dead person laying there. This is somebody who's alive, and in many cases, they are going to be doing something, going to be moving in some way, and figuring out how to effectively capture that is great. The significance of variety that you mentioned earlier as well, just going in with the intention that you're not going to photograph the same stuff that you always do, or that you're just going to focus on this one particular frame. You're going to move around, and of course, you're forced to with that 50. But yeah, but then you've got certain light because of where that subject is in your studio, light coming in from one window or another, and if you move around, the light changes, and the way that it's interacting with the subject, the way that it's interacting with the camera. You can easily, as you were saying, take advantage of even just one pose and get a variety of images. So that's good. Talk to us lastly here about editing. We have light, we have composition, and then the editing process. You've already pointed out the fact that you are clean, classic, that you're trying to create imagery for your clients that are going to last. And I think that's really important to keep in mind. But do you have a particular process that you go about with your editing? And are you really stoked on a particular Lightroom preset or action or anything like that?
Yeah. So like I said, I like to get it as perfect in camera as I can. I don't want to have to do a whole lot of editing. So I do try to get everything just like as spot on as far as, white balance and, where my highlights and everything are. Then we will upload them to the computer, and I actually don't use Lightroom. I use Adobe Camera Raw. That's essentially the same thing as Lightroom.
Right.
And what I do is I like to use Tribe Archipelago presets. They're also a sponsor of mine, so thanks, Tribe Archipelago.
I'm not even going to try to spell that, but we'll have to. Actually, will you spell that for all of our listeners if you don't mind?
Yes, it is. So Tribe, Tribe.
Okay.
And it's Archipelago. So it is ARC.
Okay.
HIPELAGO.
Oh, got it. Here we go. Okay, it's starting to come up. Yeah, Tribe Archipelago, and it looks like Lightroom and ACR, so Adobe Camera Raw, like you pointed out, they're presets.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we'll make sure to link to these in the show notes. Okay, please keep going now.
So I love to use their presets. I use them on pretty much everything, and we just add one simple preset, just kind of like perfect our skin tones and our colors, and then we just kind of adjust them. If I want the contrast to be up a little bit more, if I want to play with the shadows or the highlights, and then that's basically it. So it literally takes one click and maybe a slider or two to adjust a couple of things. And that's pretty much it.
That's great. Well, again, the simplicity there saves time. And, a lot of times photographers will have a list of presets in their copy of Lightroom or maybe actions in Photoshop that they're using in order to, they'll apply one preset here, another preset there, or an action here or there. Using as the way that you described it there, I really like using that action or that preset as a baseline finish for the images that really does just kind of finish the image, right? You're shooting that image ideally, at least in most cases, spot on is the exposure, the white balance. It's what it's supposed to be, and you just apply that preset or action as a finish for the image, and you're done. I mean that the simplicity of that workflow is a beautiful, beautiful thing, and I think a lot of our listeners could probably take a cue from that. And I mean, you talked earlier, you alluded to the idea of processing a portrait session for 4 hours. That certainly is probably quite common, and in many cases, photographers are spending much, much more time than just 4 hours. How long does it usually take you or your assistant to process a session?
So with Boudoir, it is a little bit different because, we do want them to look perfect. Nobody wants to, come in for a Boudoir session and have acne all over their butt or whatever.
Sure.
So we do like to smooth skin and things like that. And I'm not going to make anybody look like a Barbie doll because that shit's ugly. This ain't pageants. But, we do like to, once we edit everything, we do like to kind of run back through and just make sure that their skin looks nice. There's no acne or, there's no kind of bumps or anything like that. So we just kind of will smooth over that really quickly. But, usually about an hour and a half to 2 hours per session is how long it usually takes my assistant to edit everything. So it's usually not that long.
That's incredible. I mean, I know that just color correction work, culling and color correction work, probably in many cases are taking photographers at least that 4 hours, if not longer. And of course, that's one of the benefits of our editing company. But the fact that you're able to do both the color correction work and, if it's even necessary, and the retouching work in that hour and a half to 2 hours is impressive. So again, props to you, props to your assistant. That's really great.
Bad. She's good.
Well, not only that, again, it speaks to the importance of the simplicity of your workflow, right? There's no need to complicate that process. And I think that's a lot of what gets in the way of efficiency for photographers. So again, this is a great reminder. And honestly, Matt, this has been a really wonderful conversation. Can we just finish by having you share again with our listeners where they can follow you online and what you're doing?
Yeah. So I actually have a group on Facebook for photographers. It's
awesome.
just called, I share a lot about my workshops and upcoming events that I'm going to be at there. And they can just type in Matt Mathews Education for Photographers.
Okay.
My Facebook is just Matt Mathews Photography. My Instagram is just Matt_Mathews. And my website is mattmathewsphotography.com.
Perfect. And that's all, by the way, again, for those of you listening in, Mathews with just one T. And we'll link to all of these in the show notes. For those of you listening in, just go check it out, bokehpodcast.com. But once again, thanks again, Matt, for making time for the Bokeh Podcast.
Thanks. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to the Bokeh Podcast today. Will you let us know what you think by leaving a review of the podcast in iTunes or maybe in the Apple Podcast app? And I'd love to hear from you personally with your thoughts about the podcast, maybe suggestions about future topics and guests for the show. My direct email is nathan@photographersedit.com. The Bokeh Podcast is brought to you by Photographers Edit, custom image editing for the wedding and portrait photographer. Just visit photographersedit.com.